A cold night in an affluent suburb. A man in a dark hoodie is stopped by a patrol officer, hungry for a career-making arrest. The cop throws him to the freezing pavement, slaps on the cuffs and brags to dispatch about taking a suspicious prowler off the streets. But there is a fatal flaw in his victory lap. The man bleeding on the asphalt isn't a criminal. He's a top-tier federal prosecutor for the Department of Justice. And he is about to dismantle that police department piece by piece. The crisp October wind whipped through the oak-lined streets of Somerset, an ultra-exclusive enclave in Chevy Chase, Maryland. It was 11:45 p.m. The neighborhood was a fortress of silent, multi-million-dollar colonials and manicured lawns, a place where the only sound after dark was usually the rustle of leaves or the distant hum of a luxury hybrid slipping into a driveway. Nathaniel Hayes loved this time of night. At 42, Nathaniel was a deputy chief in the Civil Rights Division at the United States Department of Justice, headquartered at the Robert F. Kennedy Building in downtown Washington, D.C. For the past 6 months, he had been drowning in a sprawling, high-stakes federal probe involving systemic corruption in a major metropolitan police force. His days were consumed by grand jury subpoenas, hostile witnesses, and mountains of encrypted evidence. His brain felt perpetually wired. To decompress, Nathaniel had developed a ritual. Every night, no matter how late he brought his briefs home, he would swap his $2,000 tailored suit for a pair of worn-out gray sweatpants, comfortable running shoes, and a faded navy blue Georgetown University hoodie. He would leave his phone and wallet on the kitchen island, step out his front door, and walk a 2-mile loop around his neighborhood. It was his only time to think, to breathe, to exist as a human being rather than a federal weapon. Tonight he was exhausted. He pulled the hood up over his head to block the biting chill. He had his hands jammed deep into his pockets, his head down, replaying a contentious deposition in his mind. He was completely in his own world as he turned onto Cumberland Avenue, just 3 blocks from his own front door. He didn't notice the creeping headlights at first. Officer Mitchell Carver was 26 years old, 2 years out of the academy, and burning with a toxic mix of boredom and ambition. Carver was assigned to the night shift for the local municipal police, a cushy gig in a low-crime area, but one that left him feeling like a glorified security guard. He wanted action. He wanted collars. He wanted to prove to the older veterans in the precinct that he was a sharp-eyed hunter, not just a traffic ticket dispenser. Carver's cruiser glided around the corner of Surrey Street and Cumberland without its sirens on. Through the windshield, Carver's eyes locked onto a solitary figure. A tall black man wearing a dark hoodie pulled up to obscure his face, walking slowly through one of the wealthiest, whitest zippy codes in the country, just before midnight. To Nathaniel, he was just a homeowner, walking off the stress of federal litigation. To Officer Carver, this was a walking, breathing anomaly. A target. Carver killed the cruiser's headlights and trailed Nathaniel from 50 yards back. He watched as Nathaniel paused near a driveway, simply stopping to tie a loose shoelace on his right sneaker. Bingo Carver thought his heart rate ticking up. Casing vehicles. Carver slammed his foot on the accelerator. The cruiser surged forward, the engine roaring through the quiet suburban street before braking aggressively just 10 feet from where Nathaniel stood. Before Nathaniel could fully stand up from tying his shoe, the cruiser's heavy-duty spotlight ignited. A blinding, searing beam of halogen white light slammed into Nathaniel, completely destroying his night vision. He instinctively raised his forearm to shield his eyes, squinting into the blinding glare. "Hey, stop right there. Keep your hands where I can see them." The voice booming from the PA system was young, aggressive, and practically vibrating with adrenaline. Nathaniel froze. As a DOJ civil rights prosecutor, he had spent his entire career analyzing exactly these types of encounters. He knew the statistics. He knew the psychology of a hyped-up patrolman, and he knew with chilling certainty that any sudden movement could escalate the situation from a misunderstanding to a tragedy. I said, "Get your hands out of your pockets, now." The cruiser's door slammed open. Officer Carver stepped out, his hand resting menacingly on the butt of his holstered service weapon. Nathaniel slowly, deliberately pulled his empty hands from his hoodie pockets and held them up, palms facing outward. He spoke in the calm, resonant, perfectly modulated baritone he used to command federal courtrooms. "My hands are visible, officer. Is there a problem?" Carver marched around the front of his cruiser, his posture wide, his chest puffed out beneath his tactical vest. The heavy beam of the spotlight cast long, distorted shadows across the asphalt. "What are you doing out here?" Carver demanded, shining a handheld tactical flashlight directly into Nathaniel's face, compounding the blindness. "I'm taking a walk," Nathaniel replied, keeping his voice strictly neutral. "I live right around the corner." Carver scoffed, a short, ugly sound that echoed in the quiet street. "You live around here, right? A walk, in the pitch dark, looking into people's driveways." "I stopped to tie my shoe," Nathaniel said. His analytical mind was already dissecting the encounter. No reasonable suspicion, no probable cause. A textbook Terry stop based on racial profiling and geographical incongruity. "I have a right to walk on a public sidewalk, officer. Am I being detained?" The legal terminology hung in the air for a fraction of a second. Carver hated when civilians used legal buzzwords. It felt like defiance. It felt like a challenge to his authority. "You're detained until I say you're not," Carver snapped, closing the distance until he was less than 2 feet away. "Let me see your ID." "I don't have my ID on me," Nathaniel stated calmly. "I left my wallet at my house, which again is 3 blocks from here. I can give you my name and address." "No ID." Carver's voice spiked with triumphant suspicion. "Convenient. Turn around. Face away from me. Keep your hands in the air." Nathaniel didn't move immediately. "Officer, under Maryland law, you must have articulable reasonable suspicion that a crime is being or is about to be committed to demand identification or detain me." "What specific crime do you suspect me of committing?" The refusal to immediately comply, combined with the flawless legal recitation, was the spark that hit the powder keg. Carver didn't see a citizen asserting his Fourth Amendment rights. He saw a suspect resisting. "I said turn around." Before Nathaniel could process the command, Carver lunged. The officer grabbed Nathaniel's right wrist, twisted it violently behind his back, and shoved his full body weight against the prosecutor's shoulders. The assault was so sudden and forceful that Nathaniel lost his footing. He pitched forward, his face slamming brutally onto the cold, rough asphalt of the sidewalk. Pain exploded in his jaw. He tasted blood instantly metallic and warm pooling in his mouth, where his teeth had cut deeply into his inner lip. "Stop resisting! Stop resisting!" Carver yelled, though Nathaniel wasn't fighting back at all. It was the standard script the verbal theater cops used to justify physical force for the dash cam audio. Carver drove his knee hard into the center of Nathaniel's spine, pinning him to the ground. The officer's heavy-duty boots scraped against the concrete. "I am not resisting." Nathaniel grunted, his cheek pressed flat against the freezing pavement. The humiliation burned hotter than the physical pain. He was a high-ranking official of the United States government, a man who regularly briefed the Attorney General, currently being treated like a vagrant on the street where he paid property taxes. Carver yanked Nathaniel's left arm back, forcing it to meet the right. The cold steel of the handcuffs clamped down, viciously biting into Nathaniel's wrists. Carver clicked them tight, too tight, cutting off the circulation. Across the street, the glow of a porch light flicked on. The front door of 402 Cumberland gently cracked open. Susan Abernathy, a retired pediatrician who had attended Nathaniel's neighborhood barbecue just 3 weeks prior, peered through the gap, her face pale with shock. "Get up!" Carver ordered, grabbing the chain of the cuffs and hauling Nathaniel to his feet with no regard for his shoulder joints. Nathaniel stood swaying slightly. Blood dripped from his chin onto the Georgetown logo of his hoodie. His chest heaved, but his eyes, when they finally locked onto Carver's in the glow of the street lamp, were terrifyingly calm. There was no fear in them, only the cold, calculating gaze of a predator who had just been handed the keys to the cage. "You have made a catastrophic mistake tonight, officer," Nathaniel said softly. "Save it for the judge, buddy." Carver sneered, patting Nathaniel down roughly and finding nothing but a set of house keys. "You're going downtown for prowling failure to identify and resisting arrest." Carver grabbed Nathaniel by the scruff of his hoodie and marched him towards the cruiser. He shoved the federal prosecutor into the cramped, hard plastic back seat of the patrol car, slamming the door shut with a resounding thud. Walking back to the driver's side, Carver pulled the radio mic from his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I've got one in custody. Male suspicious person resisting. Heading to the station for booking." "Copy that, Unit 4," the dispatcher crackled back. Carver slid into the driver's seat, glancing at Nathaniel in the rearview mirror with a smug, self-satisfied grin. "Should have just brought your ID, pal." Nathaniel sat in the dark, the tight handcuffs digging into his wrists, tasting his own blood. He didn't say another word. He was done talking to the patrolman. He was ready to talk to the department. The municipal precinct was a depressing cinder-block fortress, smelling faintly of bleach, stale sweat, and cheap burnt coffee. At 12:30 a.m., the booking area was quiet, manned only by a bored civilian clerk and the shift supervisor, Sergeant Louis Gable. Gable was a 20-year veteran, a graying, heavy-set man who was just trying to ride out his final years to a pension without any major paperwork headaches. He looked up from his computer monitor as the automatic double doors slid open. Officer Carver marched in, firmly gripping the bicep of a tall, handcuffed man in a blood-stained hoodie. "Look what the cat dragged in," Carver announced loudly, a swagger in his step. "Caught this one-casing driveways over in Somerset. Tried to give me a hard time. Refused to ID." Sergeant Gable sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "All right, bring him to the desk. Empty his pockets." Carver roughly patted Nathaniel down again, placing a single key ring on the metal counter. "No wallet, no phone. Claims he lives in the neighborhood." Carver laughed openly at the absurdity of the idea. Gable looked at the suspect. The man was bleeding from the mouth, but his posture was unnervingly straight. He didn't have the twitchy, desperate look of a petty thief, nor the drunken sway of a late-night wanderer. He stood in the cuffs with an eerie, composed stillness. "Name?" Gable asked, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Nathaniel Hayes." The voice was smooth, deep, and projected with the clarity of a trained public speaker. "Address 415 Cumberland Avenue." "Chevy Chase," Carver snorted. "Yeah, right. That's a $3 million property." Gable shot Carver a warning look. He didn't like rookie arrogance before turning back to Nathaniel. "Listen, Mr. Hayes, since you don't have ID, we have to run your prints through live scan to verify your identity before we can process anything. Step over to the glass." Carver unlocked Nathaniel's cuffs, keeping a firm grip on his shoulder, and led him to the digital fingerprint scanner. Nathaniel complied flawlessly, pressing his thumbs and index fingers onto the glowing green glass without a word. Once the prints were captured, Carver immediately slapped the cuffs back on him and forcefully guided him into holding cell 3, a 10 by 10 concrete room with a metal bench and a reinforced glass window. "Sit tight, slick," Carver mocked, locking the heavy door. He strolled back to the booking desk, leaning against the counter and pulling out his phone to text his buddies. "I'm telling you, Sarge guy was super aggressive. Hit me with the whole, 'Am I being detained?' sovereign citizen garbage." Gable didn't respond. He was staring at his computer screen. The live scan system had just returned a hit from the FBI's Next Generation Identification (NGI) database. Because Nathaniel Hayes held top secret /SC federal security clearance, his fingerprints didn't just return a standard driver's license match. They triggered a specialized secure profile return. The screen flashed. Name Hayes, Nathaniel D. Dobb, August 14th, 1983. Status clearance active. TS/SC. I employer. United States Department of Justice. Title, Deputy Chief Civil Rights Division. Sergeant Gable stopped breathing. The color drained from his face so fast he felt dizzy. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He slowly looked up from the monitor, turning his head to stare through the reinforced glass of Holding Cell 3. The man in the blood-stained hoodie was sitting quietly on the metal bench, looking directly back at him. "Carver," Gable whispered. His voice was trembling. "Yeah, Sarge, you get his real name. Probably got warrants out of Baltimore, right?" Carver didn't look up from his phone. Gable stood up. He grabbed Carver by the tactical vest and physically dragged the young officer behind the desk, shoving his face toward the glowing monitor. "Read it!" Gable hissed his voice, dropping to a terrified guttural whisper. "Read the screen, you absolute moron!" Carver blinked annoyed and focused on the text. His eyes scanned the words. United States Department of Justice. Deputy Chief Civil Rights Division. The phone slipped from Carver's hand and clattered loudly onto the linoleum floor. "No!" Carver breathed. His arrogance evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, suffocating panic. No, that's a mistake in the system. He was walking in a hoodie. He didn't have ID. He was walking in his own neighborhood. Gable exploded, keeping his voice low so the other officers in the back wouldn't hear. "You just tackled, battered, and falsely arrested a federal prosecutor, a deputy chief of the Civil Rights Division. Do you understand what that division does?" "Carver. They investigate us. They put cops in federal prison." Carver looked like he was going to vomit. "Sarge, He resisted. He wouldn't give me his ID. Shut up!" Gable snapped. He looked at the blood on Nathaniel's face through the cell window. "You drew blood. You injured a federal official without probable cause." Gable reached for the precinct's secure phone line. His hand was shaking. He bypassed the lieutenant and dialed the direct emergency cell phone number of Chief Gregory Walsh. It was 1:15 a.m. Walsh answered on the fourth ring, his voice groggy. "Gable, this better be a major emergency." Chief Gable said, his voice cracking. "You need to get down to the precinct, right now. Call the city attorney on your way." "What the hell happened, Lewis?" Officer Carver just brought in a suspect for a Terry stop failure to ID. He roughed him up pretty bad. Busted his lip. "So why are you calling me at 1 a.m. for a use of force report?" Gable swallowed hard. "Because the suspect in cell 3 is Nathaniel Hayes, the deputy chief of the DOJ's Civil Rights Division. And chief, he's asking for his phone call." There was a dead, horrifying silence on the other end of the line. When Chief Walsh finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Do not speak to him. Do not touch him. I am leaving my house now." The line went dead. Gable hung up the phone. He looked at Carver, who was now hyperventilating against the filing cabinets. Inside the holding cell, Nathaniel Hayes gently touched his swollen lip with his chained hands, looked at the camera mounted in the corner of the room, and allowed a small, grim smile to cross his face. The trap had been sprung, and they had no idea how deep it went. Chief Gregory Walsh practically tore the precinct's rear entry doors off their hinges when he arrived at 1:42 a.m. He was a man who usually projected immaculate authority, but tonight his uniform shirt was untucked, his tie was missing, and his face was the color of wet ash. He bypassed the front desk entirely and stormed into the shift supervisor's office, slamming the door shut behind him. Sergeant Gable was already standing, looking like a man awaiting the firing squad. Officer Mitchell Carver was sitting in the corner, his head buried in his hands, trembling uncontrollably. "Where is he?" Walsh demanded, his voice a lethal vibrating hiss. "Cell 3, Chief Gable replied, swallowing hard. "He hasn't made a sound. He hasn't even asked to wipe the blood off his face." "Did you read him his rights? Did you question him?" "No, sir. As soon as the live scan hit, I shut the whole process down. Nobody has spoken to him." Chief Walsh closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose as if trying to stave off a massive aneurysm. He pointed a trembling finger at Carver. "Pull the dash cam and body cam footage. Right now. I want to see exactly what this idiot did before the city attorney gets here." Gable quickly logged into the precinct's secure server, brought up Carver's cruiser ID, and clicked on the synchronized video files. The three men crowded around the glowing monitor in the dimly lit office. The video began playing. The cruiser's perspective showed the quiet, affluent street. Then the spotlight ignited, blinding the camera lens for a fraction of a second before adjusting to reveal Nathaniel Hayes, dressed in his Georgetown hoodie, simply standing near a sidewalk, adjusting his shoe. Walsh watched in horrifying silence as the audio kicked in. He heard Carver's hyped-up aggressive commands. He heard Nathaniel's calm, perfectly articulated assertion of his Fourth Amendment rights. And then he watched the physical takedown. When Carver violently twisted Nathaniel's arm and drove the federal prosecutor face first into the concrete, Walsh physically recoiled. The sickening thud of Nathaniel's face hitting the pavement echoed from the computer speakers. "Pause it," Walsh ordered, his voice hollow. He turned to Carver, his eyes practically glowing with rage. "You had absolutely zero reasonable suspicion. He was walking. He wasn't looking into cars. He wasn't trespassing. He stated his address. You bypassed every de-escalation protocol we have, and you assaulted a deputy chief of the Justice Department because he made you feel small by knowing the law better than you." Chief Carver stammered, tears welling in his eyes. He was wearing a hoodie, and at Somerset we've had package thefts. "Package thefts," Walsh roared, losing his composure completely. "Package thefts at midnight. You absolute liability. You just handed the federal government the keys to our city on a silver platter. You think qualified immunity is going to save you from this? He's going to sue you into bankruptcy, and then he's going to dismantle this entire department." The door to the office clicked open, and Arthur Pendleton, the city attorney, slipped inside. Pendleton was a sharp, notoriously ruthless lawyer who made his living making police misconduct lawsuits quietly disappear. But as he looked at the frozen frame of Nathaniel Hayes bleeding on the concrete, Pendleton didn't look ruthless. He looked sick. "I got your text, Greg," Pendleton said, loosening his collar. "Tell me the live scan was a glitch." "It's him, Arthur," Walsh said grimly. "Nathaniel Hayes, Civil Rights Division." Pendleton swore loudly, pacing the small room. "Do you know who this guy is? He's not just a lawyer. He's the DOJ's apex predator. He led the consent decree in Baltimore. He gutted the gang unit in Los Angeles. If he even sneezes, the Attorney General hands him a tissue. We have to get him out of that cell. Now. We release him. We apologize. We offer to pay his medical bills. And we pray to God he doesn't go to the press. We can't just unarrest him," Gable interjected nervously. "He's been booked into the system. There's a paper trail. Delete the draft file," Pendleton ordered. "Wipe the booking log. We will call it a detainment error, not an arrest. Chief, you and I are going in there. We are going to be as deferential as humanly possible." Walsh nodded, smoothing down his hair and buttoning his collar. He grabbed the cell keys from Gable's desk. "Carver, you stay here. If you so much as breathe in his direction, I will personally throw you through a window." Walsh and Pendleton walked down the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway toward the holding area. The silence in the precinct was deafening. They stopped outside cell 3. Through the glass, Nathaniel Hayes sat in the exact same position as an hour ago. His posture was immaculate despite the handcuffs. The blood on his chin had dried into a dark, crusty streak over the Georgetown logo. Walsh unlocked the heavy steel door, pulling it open with a metallic groan. "Mr. Hayes." Walsh began, his voice dripping with practiced, soothing diplomacy. "I am Chief Gregory Walsh. This is Arthur Pendleton, the city attorney. There has been a catastrophic misunderstanding tonight, and I cannot express how profoundly sorry I am for the unacceptable treatment you've received." Walsh stepped forward, holding out the key to the handcuffs. "Let's get those off you right now, sir. You are free to go. We have a car waiting out front to take you home or to the hospital if you prefer. Officer Carver has been immediately suspended, pending a full internal affairs investigation." Nathaniel didn't move his arms. He didn't offer his wrists to be uncuffed. He simply looked up, his dark eyes locking on to Walsh with the chilling intensity of a sniper looking through a scope. "Am I being formally unarrested, Chief Walsh?" Nathaniel asked, his voice steady and devoid of emotion. Walsh and Pendleton exchanged a quick, nervous glance. "We are voiding the arrest, yes." Pendleton stepped in, forcing a polite smile. "It was an illegal detainment based on a rookie's profound lack of judgment. It will not appear on your record, Mr. Hayes. We are wiping the slate clean tonight." "No," Nathaniel said softly. The word hung in the cold air of the cell. "Excuse me," Walsh asked, confused. "I said no," Nathaniel repeated, slowly leaning forward. "You will not void the arrest. You will not delete the booking log. You will formally process my paperwork for failure to identify and resisting arrest. You will take my mugshot. And you will hold me here until a magistrate judge sets my bail in the morning." Pendleton's polite smile vanished. "Mr. Hayes, be reasonable. We are trying to make this right. You don't want an arrest on your record. My record is spotless." Nathaniel cut him off, his voice rising just enough to command the entire room. "But your department's record is not. I want the paper trail. I want the timestamps. I want the dashcam footage preserved as federal evidence, not conveniently lost during a system reboot tomorrow morning." Nathaniel stood up. Even in handcuffs, he completely dominated the physical space of the cell. "You think you can beat me up, throw me in a cage, realize who I work for, and just open the door like nothing happened?" Nathaniel's eyes darted between the two men. Officer Carver didn't make a mistake tonight. He performed exactly as he was trained to perform. He saw a black man in a wealthy neighborhood, decided I didn't belong, and manufactured a reason to deploy physical force. The only difference tonight is that he picked the wrong victim. "Mr. Hayes, please." Walsh pleaded, panic, finally breaking through his authoritative facade. "We will fire him. I swear to you. Just let us take the cuffs off." "Keep them on," Nathaniel commanded, "because if you release me without processing, you are admitting to kidnapping. Process the arrest, Chief Walsh. I'll see you in federal court." Nathaniel sat back down on the metal bench, turned his head away and closed his eyes. The negotiation was over. Walsh and Pendleton stood in the doorway staring at the man in the bloodied hoodie, realizing with absolute dread that they weren't looking at a victim. They were looking at a trap, and the jaws had just snapped shut. The morning sun broke over Washington, D.C., casting long shadows across the imposing limestone facade of the Robert F. Kennedy Department of Justice building. Inside a secure conference room on the 5th floor, the atmosphere was electric with controlled fury. Nathaniel Hayes sat at the head of a massive mahogany table. The handcuffs were gone, replaced by a dark, flawlessly tailored Tom Ford suit. The only remnants of his ordeal were a swollen, bruised lower lip and a small bandage over his left cheekbone. Across from him sat Assistant Attorney General Diane Foster, a brilliant cutthroat prosecutor who headed the entire Civil Rights Division. She was currently staring at high-resolution photographs of Nathaniel's battered face and the deep purple bruising around his wrists. They processed the arrest, Nathaniel said, tapping a thick file folder on the table. I bonded out at 8 a.m. They charged me with resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. Both misdemeanors. The magistrate judge looked at my DOJ credentials, looked at my face, and almost had a heart attack on the bench. Diane Foster slammed the photos down onto the table. I am going to burn their precinct to the ground. I want the FBI in Somerset by noon. I want hard drives seized. I want dispatch logs pulled, and I want that rookie's badge on my desk. Diane, look at the bigger picture, Nathaniel said, leaning forward. He slid a second, much thicker binder across the table. The cover read, Somerset Municipal Police. Traffic and Pedestrian. Stop data, 2021 to 2026. Diane frowned, opening the binder. What is this? For the past 4 months, I've had my clerks quietly running data on suburban municipal police forces operating on the borders of D.C. Nathaniel explained, his eyes sharp. Somerset PD popped up as a statistical anomaly. Despite black and Hispanic individuals making up only 9% of the local population, they account for 72% of all pedestrian stops and use of force incidents in that jurisdiction. Diane looked up from the data, her eyes widening as the realization hit her. I couldn't get authorization to open a formal pattern or practice investigation because we didn't have a solid, unimpeachable complaining witness. Nathaniel continued, a grim smile touching his injured lip. It was all just statistics. Local public defenders were pleading the cases out before they ever reached federal radar. We needed a perfect plaintiff. Someone with no criminal history, who knew the law, and who could survive the character assassination the police union would inevitably deploy. Diane stared at him, utterly stunned. Nathaniel, you didn't bait them into this. Tell me you didn't intentionally take a beating. I took a walk in my own neighborhood. Diane. Nathaniel replied, his voice deadly serious. I did nothing illegal, but I knew the odds. When the spotlight hit me, I knew exactly what was happening. Officer Carver just provided us with the smoking gun we needed to establish a Monell claim. Under Monell v. Department of Social Services, a municipality can be held liable for civil rights violations if the unconstitutional actions of its employees are the result of an official policy or a widespread custom. Carver's actions, the immediate escalation, the false arrest, the casual brutality were too confident to be an isolated incident. They were the actions of a cop who knew his department would cover for him. I am filing a Title 42 Section 1983 civil rights lawsuit against Officer Mitchell Carver, Chief Gregory Walsh, and the City of Somerset, Nathaniel stated. I am suing them for $12 million. But the money is leverage. We use the civil discovery process to pry open their internal affairs files, their training manuals, and their disciplinary records. Once we have the dirt, the DOJ steps in and forces a federal consent decree. Diane smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression. Draft the complaint. I'll alert the Attorney General. By Tuesday morning, the lawsuit was filed in the United States District Court for the District of Maryland. The fallout was instantaneous and catastrophic. At 10 a.m., Nathaniel held a press conference on the steps of the federal courthouse. He didn't speak with the fiery rage of a typical victim. He spoke with the cold, surgical precision of a prosecutor presenting a closing argument. On Friday night, I was assaulted and falsely imprisoned by an officer who swore an oath to protect the Constitution. Nathaniel told the sea of reporters, his bruised face flashing across every major news network in the country. This lawsuit is not merely about what happened to me. It is about what happens to the thousands of citizens who do not have the platform, the legal training, or the resources to fight back when those in power abuse their authority. The darkness in the Somerset Police Department ends today. Across town, City Hall was in a state of absolute meltdown. Mayor Philip Caldwell was screaming in his private office, pacing in front of Chief Walsh and City Attorney Arthur Pendleton. The television in the corner was muted, showing B-roll footage of the Somerset Police Precinct, intercut with Nathaniel's face. $12 million, Mayor Caldwell bellowed, hurling a copy of the legal complaint across the room. The city's entire annual discretionary budget isn't $12 million. Our municipal liability insurance provider called me 20 minutes ago. They are threatening to drop our coverage entirely. If they drop us, we can't legally operate a police force. Philip, we are trying to mitigate the damage. Pendleton said, his face slick with sweat. We fired Carver this morning. We didn't even suspend him, we terminated him for cause. We're hoping that shows good faith to the federal judge. Good faith. Caldwell laughed hysterically. Have you read page 47 of this complaint, Arthur? He's subpoenaed the personnel files of every officer in the department. He's demanding 5 years of email correspondence between the chief's office and the patrol division. He doesn't just want a payout. He wants to put this entire city under federal receivership. Chief Walsh sat in a leather armchair, looking 10 years older than he had on Friday night. We can't fight him, Philip. I've seen the dashcam footage. It's indefensible. Carver practically dry snitched on our entire proactive patrol strategy. If this goes to a jury trial, they won't just award him $12 million. They'll award punitive damages that will bankrupt the city. Then settle it, Caldwell screamed. Give him whatever he wants. Make it go away. But Nathaniel Hayes didn't want it to go away. Over the next 6 weeks, the civil discovery process ripped the Somerset Police Department apart. Nathaniel's legal team, operating with the full, silent backing of the DOJ, uncovered a staggering trove of evidence. They found text threads between shift supervisors, encouraging officers to target out-of-place demographics in wealthy neighborhoods. They found internal affairs, complaints from minority drivers that had been systematically buried by Sergeant Gable. They found that Officer Carver had 3 previous excessive force complaints that had been completely ignored by Chief Walsh. The $12 million lawsuit was the bludgeon that shattered the department's wall of silence. Facing inevitable destruction in federal court, the city of Somerset capitulated. They agreed to a massive $8.5 million financial settlement. But the money was the least of their concessions. As part of the settlement, Mayor Caldwell was forced to invite the Department of Justice in to conduct a top-to-bottom audit of the police force. Chief Gregory Walsh was forced into an immediate disgraced early retirement. Sergeant Gable was demoted to desk duty permanently, and Mitchell Carver, the young, arrogant officer who just wanted to make a name for himself, got exactly what he wished for. He was indicted by a federal grand jury for deprivation of rights under color of law, facing up to 10 years in federal prison. On a quiet Friday evening, 2 months after the settlement was finalized, Nathaniel Hayes stepped out of his front door on Cumberland Avenue. He was wearing his faded navy blue Georgetown hoodie sweatpants and running shoes. The bruise on his face had long since healed. He walked down the driveway, turned onto the sidewalk, and began his 2-mile loop. A Somerset Municipal Patrol cruiser slowly rolled down the street. The new officer behind the wheel saw the tall black man in the hoodie walking in the dark. The officer didn't speed up. He didn't hit the spotlight. He simply kept his hands at 10, and 2 drove past at the speed limit and disappeared into the night. Nathaniel Hayes pulled his hood up against the chill, put his hands in his pockets, and continued his walk in peace. The quiet walk on Cumberland Avenue was supposed to be the end of the nightmare. Nathaniel Hayes had forced the city to bleed, secured an unprecedented settlement, and purged the toxic leadership from the Somerset Police Department. But in the gritty insular world of municipal law enforcement, a federal settlement is just a piece of paper. The real power didn't reside in the mayor's office. It resided in the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 42, and Lodge 42 was out for blood. Frank Sullivan, the union president, was a barrel-chested 60-year-old with a red face and a terrifying grip on local politics. He viewed Mitchell Carver's federal indictment not as a necessary house cleaning, but as an existential threat to every badge-carrying officer in the state. If a cop could be sent to federal prison for a routine Terry stop gone slightly wrong, Sullivan reasoned nobody was safe. They threw the kid to the wolves to save their own pensions. Sullivan roared at a closed-door union meeting, slamming his heavy fist against a podium. The room, packed with 200 off-duty officers, vibrated with angry murmurs. The DOJ thinks they can waltz into our backyard, ruin a young man's life, and hold us hostage. We do not roll over. We make them feel it. The retaliation began subtly, an insidious psychological warfare campaign designed to break Nathaniel before Carver's federal trial commenced. It started with the phantom patrols. At exactly 2 a.m. every single night, a Somerset police cruiser would slowly roll down Cumberland Avenue, pause directly in front of Nathaniel's driveway, and idle for 5 full minutes. The officers never stepped out. They never flashed their lights. They just sat there, the deep rumble of the V8 engine vibrating through the walls of Nathaniel's home, a silent, menacing reminder. We know where you sleep. Then the blue flu hit the neighborhood. When Susan Abernathy, Nathaniel's neighbor who had witnessed the assault, called 911 to report a suspicious vehicle parked near her garage, the police response time was an agonizing 45 minutes. When they finally arrived, the officers were dismissive, barely taking notes before driving off. The message to the community was crystal clear. Support the prosecutor, and you're on your own. Sullivan also unleashed Maxwell Davies, a notoriously vicious defense attorney, funded entirely by the police union's war chest, to represent Carver. Davies was a master of media manipulation. He immediately began leaking carefully doctored narratives to conservative radio hosts and local tabloids. Headlines began to shift. Did DOJ power player bait rookie cop for $1 million payday? And the setup on Cumberland Avenue, how a federal lawyer bankrupted a city. Davies hired private investigators to dig through Nathaniel's entire prosecutorial history, looking for disgruntled former witnesses, angry ex-girlfriends, or any shred of dirt that could be weaponized to destroy Nathaniel's credibility on the witness stand. The stress began to mount. One evening in late November, Nathaniel was sitting in his living room, reviewing trial exhibits, when a sudden blinding flash of light pierced his front windows. He flinched, his heart hammering in his chest. He rushed to the window, pulling the blinds back just in time to see a dark SUV speeding away without its headlights on. A heavy rock sat on his pristine front lawn. Wrapped around it was a printed copy of the local police union's newsletter. The headline was circled in thick red marker, "The Enemy Within." The next morning, Nathaniel marched into the Robert F. Kennedy building, his face set in a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He bypassed his own office and walked directly into the suite of Diane Foster, the Assistant Attorney General. He dropped the rock and the circled newsletter onto her pristine glass desk. The loud clack echoed in the quiet office. "They aren't backing down, Diane," Nathaniel said, his voice dangerously low. "Sullivan is orchestrating a coordinated witness intimidation campaign. They are trying to terrorize my neighbors and force me to drop the criminal testimony against Carver." Diane looked at the rock, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. She had spent her career dismantling organized crime syndicates and corrupt institutions. She recognized mob tactics when she saw them. "They think they're dealing with a local civilian," Diane murmured, leaning back in her leather chair. "They forget who they just declared war on." "I want authorization to escalate," Nathaniel demanded. "No more playing nice. No more civil settlements. I want the FBI's Public Corruption Unit to wiretap Frank Sullivan's phones. I want the financial records of Lodge 42 subpoenaed. And I want Sergeant Lewis Gable. Diane raised an eyebrow. Gable, the shift supervisor. Gable was demoted, not fired. Nathaniel explained, pacing the room. He's a 20-year veteran, sitting at a desk, counting the days to his pension, watching his career circle the drain because he covered for a rookie. He knows where Sullivan buries the bodies. If the union is using off-book funds to harass me, Gable knows how the orders are transmitted. We squeeze Gable, he flips on Sullivan, and the entire blue wall comes crumbling down. Diane picked up her secure phone. I'll have the warrants on a federal judge's desk in an hour. It's time to show them what a DOJ strike force actually looks like. The trap was reset. But this time, Nathaniel wasn't acting alone. The full crushing weight of the United States government was about to descend on Somerset. The federal courthouse in Baltimore was a fortress of limestone and marble, a stark contrast to the sterile municipal precinct where this nightmare had begun. The trial of the United States of America versus Mitchell Carver was the highest-profile civil rights case of the decade. The courtroom was packed to absolute capacity with journalists, legal scholars, and dozens of off-duty police officers wearing matching blue union shirts, glaring daggers at the prosecution table. Mitchell Carver sat next to his high-priced union lawyer, Maxwell Davis. The former officer looked pale, thin, and terrified. The arrogant swagger that had defined him on the night of the arrest was completely gone. Nathaniel Hayes took the witness stand on the third day of the trial. Dressed in a charcoal suit, his posture immaculate, he looked every bit the apex federal prosecutor. Davies approached the podium for cross-examination, smelling blood in the water. He planned to tear Nathaniel's reputation to shreds in front of the jury. Mr. Hayes, Davies began, his voice dripping with condescension. You are an expert in civil rights law, are you not? I am, Nathaniel replied calmly. You've lectured at universities on police procedure. You know the exact legal thresholds for a Terry stop. You know exactly what a police officer is trained to look for. Davies paced in front of the jury box. Isn't it true, Mr. Hayes, that on the night in question, you intentionally acted suspiciously? You wore dark clothing, obscured your face, and refused to provide identification, knowing full well it would provoke an inexperienced officer. You wanted a confrontation, didn't you? Objection, argumentative, the federal prosecutor assigned to the case called out. Overruled, I'll allow it, Judge Albert Covington replied, peering over his glasses. Nathaniel leaned into the microphone. He didn't look at Davies. He looked directly at the jury. I was wearing a sweatshirt in October, Mr. Davies. I was tying my shoe on a public sidewalk. I asserted my constitutional right not to be unlawfully detained without reasonable suspicion. If a police officer is provoked into physical violence because a citizen calmly exercises their Fourth Amendment rights, then that officer belongs in a prison cell, not in a patrol car. The courtroom erupted into whispers. The union cops in the gallery scowled. You ruined my client's life for a payout. Davies shot back, losing his composure. Your client drove his knee into my spine and handcuffed me for walking while black in a wealthy zip code. Nathaniel fired back, his voice echoing through the high-ceilinged room. He ruined his own life, but the real fatal blow didn't come from Nathaniel. It came the following morning, in a twist that sent shockwaves through the entire state. The prosecution called Sergeant Lewis Gable to the stand. When Gable walked through the double doors, the police officers in the gallery sat up in stunned silence. Frank Sullivan, sitting in the second row, turned completely white. Gable took the oath, his hands trembling slightly, and sat in the witness box. He avoided looking at Carver or Sullivan. He had cut an immunity deal with the FBI just 48 hours prior, trading his testimony for protection against racketeering charges. Sergeant Gable, the federal prosecutor asked, are you familiar with the phrase, containment patrol within the Somerset Police Department. Gable swallowed hard. Yes. It was an unwritten off-the-books directive pushed by the union leadership and tolerated by the former chief. We were instructed to heavily scrutinize any minorities in the Somerset neighborhoods after dark. The goal was to make them uncomfortable, to make sure they knew they were being watched, so they wouldn't come back. Carver buried his face in his hands. Davies slumped back in his chair. And did Officer Carver act independently on the night he assaulted Nathaniel Hayes? No, Gable said softly, his voice cracking. Carver was doing exactly what Union President Frank Sullivan told the rookies to do. Be aggressive. Establish dominance. I watched the dashcam video that night. Carver wasn't an anomaly. He was the product of a system we all helped build. The courtroom exploded. Judge Covington violently slammed his gavel, threatening to clear the gallery. Sullivan stood up, his face purple with rage, but two federal marshals immediately stepped behind him, forcing him to sit back down. The trial unraveled spectacularly for the defense. Gable's testimony opened the floodgates. He turned over encrypted Union text messages, proving that Sullivan had ordered the phantom patrols outside Nathaniel's house. He proved the intimidation campaign. By the end of the week, the jury took less than 4 hours to deliberate. The foreperson, a middle-aged teacher, stood up and read the verdict. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, we find the defendant, Mitchell Carver, guilty. On the charge of falsifying a police report, we find the defendant, guilty. Carver broke down into loud, heaving sobs as the marshals moved in to place him in handcuffs, the very same cold steel he had so arrogantly slapped onto Nathaniel's wrists months ago. As Carver was led away, the FBI made their move. Federal agents entered the courtroom gallery and quietly surrounded Frank Sullivan. The union boss was placed under federal arrest for witness intimidation, racketeering, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. The untouchable king of the Blue Wall was finally dethroned. Nathaniel Hayes walked out of the courthouse and down the wide granite steps. The air was crisp, identical to the night this whole ordeal had begun. The cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Nathaniel just gave a brief, satisfied nod. He had not only won his case, he had amputated the rot that had infected an entire city. Justice wasn't just a concept he argued in a courtroom anymore. It was the reality he had forced upon them with his bare hands and an unbreakable will. Wow, what an absolute roller coaster of power, corruption, and justice. If Nathaniel Hayes's brilliant takedown of a corrupt system had your heart pounding, you need to show some love. Hit that like button to support true justice. Share this insane story with your friends who love legal drama and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable real-life stories where the underdog bites back. Ring that notification bell so you never miss out on the action. What would you have done in Nathaniel's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.